You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. We'll have more news this evening, but first...
The latest Genealogy, a Roddenberry podcast.
Episode 58, Wrangler. Welcome to Mission Log Genealogy. I'm Ashley Thomas.
And I'm Earl Green. Each week on Genealogy, we examine scripts and shows from the Roddenberry archive, looking through the early work Gene Roddenberry did years before he created Star Trek.
But sometimes we have to go through someone else's archives.
Sometimes it's not even us going through someone else's archives.
Now, before we get to this week's trivia, let me take a brief moment to encourage you to join us on our Patreon, or follow us on YouTube, or leave a review wherever you're listening to us, or all of the above. And now, this week's trivia. Earl, have you wrangled some trivia for us?
Oh, I may have wrangled too much trivia. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I have to point out that our own John Champion and Holly Amos have played a huge part in doing some behind-the-scenes research, heavy lifting, in looking up all things Wrangler behind the scenes. So if you were expecting Battle of the Roddenberry Podcast Network trivia stars here, I hate to disappoint you. None of us brought our 1970s gym shorts. This is a team effort, and they were able to look up material that was simply out of my reach. And all of that enables me to tell you the following, and to explain why this show is of particular interest to Genealogy. Wrangler was the first series created by Gene Roddenberry to hit the airwaves. A show gestated during the time of his overall development deal with Screen Gems, the physical production of Wrangler was entrusted to Hollis Productions, which was an arm of Paramount Pictures handling television production. Keep in mind that in 1960, Paramount had yet to successfully position itself in TV, a foothold that it really wouldn't gain until, irony of ironies, it bought Desilu from Lucille Ball in 1968. Hollis had also produced a previous Gene pilot known variously as Nightstick and Footbeat, which we have been unable to cover, and still won't be able to cover unless either a script or the actual film turns up. That police drama was bought by ABC on the strength of its pilot episode, meaning it did get a series order, but then a sudden decision to program a full schedule of westerns on Sunday nights cheated what could have been Gene's first series out of its time slot at a very late stage. But no film was involved in the production of Wrangler. While history seems to have forgotten that this was the first Gene Roddenberry series to be broadcast, it has not forgotten Wrangler's other unique claim to fame. It was the first Western to be shot entirely on videotape rather than film. Unlike the British television production workflow at the time, which was to shoot location scenes on film, but studio scenes on video, the entirety of Wrangler was shot on tape, often with a multi-camera setup similar to how sitcoms and soap operas are filmed. With an action show, it was unheard of. Stunts might go wrong, props might not work, horses might not cooperate. Let's not even talk about prop firearms. The thought that a show like this could be live-switched on tape by a director in a control room, rather than shot with a single camera, one angle at a time by a director on the set, was unheard of, and it actually garnered a Technical Emmy nomination for Wrangler in the Outstanding Achievement in Electronic Camera Work category in 1961. To put the technical side of Wrangler's innovation in context, it's necessary to point out that in 1960, videotape was just coming into wide use in television. Prior to this, as we've mentioned in the past, the entire workflow of scripted television was filmed from start to finish, and programs sourced on video, such as live newscasts, live news events, were preserved by kinescope film, literally pointing a film camera at a special television monitor whose scan rate matched as closely as possible the 24 frames per second shutter speed of film. Video cameras were giant studio-bound beasts that were moved around on large wheeled pedestals capable of holding their considerable weight, and their picture tube receptors could be overloaded by bright points of light, which is why old video, when it shows light bulbs or candles or other bright light sources, actually has a dark halo around those light sources. It's simply overloaded. In April 1956, Ampex Corporation demonstrated the first commercially available broadcast-grade videotape recording and playback system at the National Association of Broadcasters annual convention. This was the 2-inch quad videotape system that would be the broadcast standard through the 1980s. This was open-reel videotape, 2 inches wide, on 14-inch diameter spools. For playback or recording, the tape had to be painstakingly threaded through a succession of 4 playback and recording heads, hence 2-inch quad. Over the week after Ampex debuted this new system at $50,000 per machine, they raked in over $2 million of orders from the American television networks alone. CBS was the first to put the new Ampex VTRs into use in November of that year, using it to tape delay national news for playback to Pacific and Mountain time zones. NBC had 2-inch quad in its broadcast workflow by the beginning of '57. In 1958, Ampex rolled out a newer version of the gigantic machine, which took up about as much space as 2 refrigerators sitting side by side that could record and play back in color. They were still fidgety, finicky machines. The tapes were gigantic and expensive and very delicate, and editing still had to be done by hand, splicing out unwanted material, taping the fragile tape back together, and hoping the whole thing didn't fall apart during playback on national TV. It was thus considered much more desirable to use video for as-live production, meaning that studio productions were staged almost like live plays, and a technical director would switch between cameras while the tape was rolling. Even if an actor had an extraordinary expression on their face, if their camera wasn't live, that moment of performance was simply not captured. Retakes were frowned upon because someone would have to edit those into the correct sequence later. It was simpler, more economical than editing, until Ampex introduced electronic videotape editing in 1963, eliminating the need for physically splicing the tape. Okay, all of that tech talk is context for how Wrangler was put together. It was practically live TV, but tape delayed for later broadcast, with occasional, but not frequent, retakes. Everything, especially stunts, had to be rehearsed carefully. A collection of both raw recordings and finished episodes are held by the media department of the UCLA Library, and that means Ashley and I have not seen them. But John Champion and Eugene Roddenberry have. Welcome to the show, gents.
Hey, thank you.
Hey, thank you. Sorry. Trying to find my mute button there. Really great to be here, guys.
Well, it is great to have you both back on the show. It's been a minute, and we've covered a lot of stuff, but we are finally at kind of the thing that I have singled out as maybe the biggest find that this podcast has unearthed.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of Gene's history is very well known, and Earl, I'm sure you'll get into that with what's in the David Alexander biography and what's on Memory Alpha and other internet sources. But this was a little gem that we did not know about at all, except for a glimmer, a whisper of a word until we found a little bit more detail.
Yeah, and truthfully, I honestly didn't even know the years of my father's productions of these things. And you're the one who really brought it to my attention that this was his actual first show he created, as opposed to The Lieutenant. And that filling in that little gap in history, or dare I say correcting that piece of history, I mean, that's important to me. As you know, I do a lot of things to represent the Roddenberry name and to be true. I don't want to say true to my father. I'm true to myself, but being true to who he was and the ideas that he has and the ideas that I truly believe in myself. And so to have an accurate representation as to who Gene Roddenberry, the man, was, warts and all, as we've heard that expression, that's an important thing, because it is very important that we see the man from every angle, good and bad. And of course, definitions of good and bad change throughout history, as we might even talk about in some of these episodes. So anyhow, yes, a long-winded way of saying thank you, John. Thank you guys for putting this entire thing together and for locating this. It's another piece of the puzzle.
Now, I'm kind of curious how easy it was or wasn't to make arrangements with UCLA to get a look at these shows.
I'll let you start, John.
Yeah, I can speak to that. I mean, with this specifically, it wasn't particularly difficult, but it was a bit time-consuming. So it was going through a few different channels there to actually narrow down and locate the items and then find out what the process was for coming in. And they take it seriously. Rod and I were able to go down there between us a total of 3 times. They make sure that no cameras, no recording devices. You check in each time, and they bring you the what they have on DVD-R, set you up in a room, and it's not a library in the sense that you get to walk out of there and take it home with you and watch it and bring it back and pay a nickel a day late fee if you don't bring it back in time. It's not like that at all. There's a screening room, and you're allowed to take a look. Now, after that, once we had established what we were doing and what the procedure would be, it was a lot quicker after that process. And within recent weeks, we've been able to get down there on a couple of different days and have a second and third look, fortunately.
UCLA has been great. We've got the short history is, I believe my parents at some point donated a number of documents to them, which in hindsight, but I wish they hadn't because of what we're doing now these days with the Roddenberry Archive. While these documents are accessible to, I think, anyone who calls in and makes an appointment to see them. And when I say documents, I'm including video materials as well. It's just another step. But I'm glad they are preserved there. I just want them to become part of the Roddenberry Archive because I do want one central place for everything Star Trek, everything Roddenberry to exist. It's not impossible. It can be done.
The real mystery is where did they get their copies? Because that was one of my first questions was, okay, you have these on DVD-R. They had to come from somewhere. Going back to your trivia, Earl, they had to come from these 2-inch quad tapes back in 1960. Those were probably bumped down to something. I believe one of the DVDs they say was sourced from Half-Inch, which is
VHS.
Yeah, VHS. But they don't have any information about where those came from or who owned them. So all we know is just that they're there now, but they have to exist somewhere on a reel unless that reel was dumped. And I hope that's not
Paramount?
the case.
Well, it wouldn't be a reel, right? Because you said it's tape. It was done on tape.
Well, but a giant 14-inch reel of 2-inch tape. Yeah.
Shouldn't that be? I mean, Paramount? These were Paramount and who? Someone else?
Hollis Productions, and we're trying to put together the rest of it and figure out if KTLA plays a role in this because the studio, 5800 Sunset, is Sunset Gower, which is also where KTLA is.
Yeah, and I believe that is probably the direction from which these tapes came to UCLA, because the studio stuff was shot at KTLA.
Yeah.
I do know that the UCLA archive does hold a lot of KTLA material. They've put a lot of that on YouTube in newscasts and public affairs programming in the past that is of, very little, I guess, copyrightable interest. So I think they have basically kind of inherited a lot of archive material of a certain vintage from KTLA.
So I guess the you guys have probably already done this, but anyone listening out there who has any sort of connection at KTLA and dare I even say Paramount, Paramount's a big place just because I somewhat work with them, or more than somewhat. I still don't know everyone there and everyone in the archive. So if anyone either has access to those places or knows a collector of classic Westerns, videos of TV shows, would love to get copies of this stuff. I know. This you've already done this, guys, but it doesn't hurt to keep putting it out there.
And I've developed a really unlikely Rolodex of contacts of film collectors and people who are really into Westerns. And, I would, on a fairly regular basis, ping people like, okay, has anything ever turned up for Wrangler? And they're like, what? Never even heard of that show. Because here's the thing. It all ran just once in a summer time slot and was never repeated again. And so even that claim to fame about it being the first video Western that's kind of obscure. Now, if I understand correctly, I believe you said that there is no title card anywhere at the front or back of any of these shows that say created by Gene Roddenberry.
Not that I saw, Rod, unless one of those popped up on one of your subsequent viewings, but I never saw a created by credit. There are written by credits throughout, but he does not have any sort of producer role on the show. There's no created by. Maybe that just wasn't a credit that they used at the time, or at least at the time for that show.
Just to clarify your statement, he had a producer role, or at least we know that he created it. We just don't know exactly what his hand was, aside from writing, right? He created it, and he did some writing. Is that all we have confirmed?
Well, and he did produce it.
Yeah.
That part is actually in the David Alexander biography, the Star Trek creator. Ironically, though, that book completely misses the big thing that's going on here that we're talking about today, which is kind of weird. And I'm going to come back to that because I have so many questions.
Yeah. Should we get into some of the episodes?
I mean, I kind of wanted to ask some bigger questions about production value.
Yeah.
At least on this side of the Atlantic, shooting scripted TV on video was for the longest time synonymous with cheap or disposable programming. It was soaps, it was game shows, it was stuff like that. How did this show look and sound? Does it make a good case for producing this sort of thing on videotape?
Rod, you want to start?
Well, listen, you're gonna plant the real knowledge here. I will say that in my mindset in today's day and age, after the first little bump on, this looks like video, it didn't bother me. I just kind of sunk into what it was. And it didn't, I remember as a kid watching, I didn't really watch Doctor Who, but Doctor Who or General Hospital, see these things on TV and you could instantly tell it was video, and it seemed really in my face. Like it seemed like, ugh, I don't like this look. It didn't bother me as much. I don't know if there's a reason, or John, if you feel a different way.
Well, I'll take up the counter position to that, which is to me, what's interesting about these episodes is that you can very clearly tell where they're taking the effort to shoot location, and some of these episodes are almost 100% location, and there's a real meticulous kind of planning to pull that off. And then you can tell where they slip in a couple of studio episodes where it's like, okay, location is hard. Let's get back to the comfort of KTLA. Let's just put a couple of cameras on the floor, standing set, move these around, let the actors do their thing. And they probably planned it exactly like that, which is, we know we're going to have a hard week shooting location. Let's come back into the studio and then do something a little bit easier. The studio episodes look like a soap opera. They look exactly like you would expect. That 29.97 frames a second, black and white, a little artificial, a little, harshly live. Contrast that with the episodes where they're out on location. Frankly, I was blown away, because when you look at old videotape, like if you look at videotape from 1960 that is high quality videotape compared to film taken in 1960, all right, the film has that sort of ethereal, high-end production. You're looking at something that is produced. You're looking at something that is like an expensive photograph, right? But contrast that with videotape, and it just feels like, oh yeah, that location's right around the corner. Those people were just there the other day. It has that very immediate feel, like they're capturing documentary footage. It just happens to be actors wearing, cowboy costumes and horses and stuff, but it feels like it's right here. Once you get past the black and white aspect of it, I thought the videotape look of it really benefited the show. I would even say, like, well, when you look at a set piece, like a couple of episodes there pulling into a town, and you can tell that town set is the same as, you know, what you catch in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. All right. And, you know, a very expensive shot on film movie. And there is a certain kind of remove that you have in your experience from watching that. Whereas watching something shot on videotape, it kind of feels like, well, I could do that because I know what a video camera looks like.
Was the location stuff tripod or pedestal mounted, or was there anything handheld?
Nothing that was handheld, but there are a couple of shots, more than a couple, you can tell that they're on cranes, and they're doing some really challenging moving camera shots. So there's some that you can go like, oh, okay, we're just doing the basic. Set up the camera, pivot to get a little bit of a pan in there to follow a horse or follow some action. But then there are others where, like I said, you know, people riding into town, and you've got a camera position high up that cranes down and then ends up on the level of where actors are riding in on their horses. I couldn't imagine, because you're talking about a camera that weighs, 500 pounds or something, plus the operator, plus everything else, and that's got to be put on this, you know, giant crane. And to get these shots then, I can't imagine how they did it. But again, they didn't do it that often. You can't do that every episode with every shot. But when they're there, they really stand out.
Thing about shooting on video, I am sure that was probably not Gene's idea. This was probably presented to him as, this is how your show's going to get on the air.
Well, and a dollars and cents thing, right? Usually?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And you can tell it's ambitious. When they do stuff like that, it's super ambitious. And there's a newspaper article from the time before the show went on the air where one of the producers, somebody associated with production, says, we might not have the best show, but we'll have the best looking show. And in a way, that person was very right. Like, when they can take the time, when they can do these shots, and you do that on videotape, which doesn't look like anything else coming out at the time other than news every now and then, which is very flat, you know, it's in a studio, just, you know, some bare walls and not really pushing the production budget there. When this show gets it right, it looks fantastic. When it doesn't get it right, you just go like, oh, okay, they're really saving the budget this week.
An attempt was made.
Exactly.
John, you even went out, though. I mean, I think everyone knows by now the amount of research this team puts into projects like this. And I was just impressed because, John, you went out and got some TV guides from 1960, didn't you?
Yeah. On the company budget, we got a couple of vintage TV guides, also some publicity photos, and really, this is just to try to finish putting together the history. Because, well, as of this recording, and this will change in the coming weeks and coming months, if you go to IMDb, that is a very incomplete listing of what is remembered, what has been cobbled together about Wrangler. What's missing there is a lot of the writer credits, some of the actor credits, air date information. So we've had to go back, and I've looked through the LA Times archive, which unfortunately lists shows but doesn't list episodes, at least not for Wrangler, not for every show. But TV Guide, some of the local issues, I've sourced one to the Pittsburgh market, I forget where the other one is from, that actually have episode listings. We can present a little more clear picture of what happened to the show. Because here's what's strange. All right, UCLA has 6 episodes. But what they're missing is the pilot episode. We know what the pilot is because it got shot, it got aired. We have 2 scripts for it. We have one that is just called Pilot and one that is called Incident at Bar M. And Earl and Ashley, you'll get to that in your recording to talk about the details of that episode. UCLA does not have that. What they do have is an episode that is not listed anywhere. It's not listed on IMDb, not listed in any other source that we can find, and that's called A Crisis Named Wavelin, which we do have a script for. We know it was written by Gene Roddenberry, and that has seemed to completely escape any sort of cataloging. So hence going back to TV Guide to determine, did this actually air? My guess is that it probably did, because it ends with a promo for Tennessee Ernie Ford coming back into his usual time slot Thursday nights at 9:30. But that was a massive surprise. We also have another script that, as far as we know, wasn't filmed. So we actually have 8 scripts. And out of those 8 scripts, we have 6, well, we've screened 6 episodes. But one of those episodes is one that slipped through the cracks because we haven't been able to screen the pilot. So there's way more to this story than even the little bit that is known online in a source like IMDb.
In the cases of both American networks, American studios, or the BBC, I'm still kind of stunned at how much has been lost.
Yeah.
Because I'm an archivist, get the whole box set kind of guy. Missing media just drives me nuts. Big trigger.
Yeah. Well, and knowing how much stuff has been lost, and even for high-profile shows like Doctor Who, it's kind of amazing to see a low-profile show like this actually get saved for the most part. Like I said, there are pieces missing. And actually, Rod, we might want to speak to this a little bit. One of the real surprises was at UCLA, one of the episodes, realizing that we're actually not watching a finished episode. What we're watching is a scene edit. So it is the cut, camera to camera, but it's not finished. Mm-hmm. There's no sound effects. There's no music, which is wild because there's a
slate
bar
in there.
fight. Yeah, you get the slates. You hear the director calling action. You have a bar fight, but it's the actors doing the stunt work, so nobody's connecting. There's no sound effects. It's just yeah. So, but that's cool because we're one step closer to the original videotape source, which means again the quality of the footage is really nice, but it just looks like what it is: actors on a stage, not. Without the polishing of sound effects and music that really heighten the drama.
It's kind of a treat for people who want to look back into how things were done in the 60s, how a Western like this was done, because I'm not sure you want to watch the entire thing through, but I mean it's a peek behind the curtain. I mean it really is, and it's cool to sort of see that. It's a treat.
Something Earl and I talk about a lot on Genealogy, but also like Earl and I have been friends for like 10 plus years. And so something that we just talk about in general is how television and film from yesteryear is kind of a reflection of how people saw themselves or their projections and things like that. So what can you tell us about Wrangler that might give us a clue into the early 1960s culture that it was airing in?
Yeah, Rod, if you don't mind, I'll share a little story about when you and I were sitting there the last time watching it, and I forgot what episode it was we were watching, and you paused it, and you asked me, like, do Westerns always do this? where it's like kind of the heightened, literally morals, meanings, messages, the 3 M's from Mission Log. And because you haven't watched a lot of Westerns, I have. No. I mean, I'm certainly nowhere near an expert on it. But I said, well, yeah. I mean, that's kind of the cool thing about setting a series in 1960 about 80 years away, 90 years away from when it's actually set. Because you could do the same thing with science fiction. You're just setting it, far ahead instead. And of course, that's what your father did when he came up with Star Trek. But you have the luxury of setting a story, 80, 90 years away from contemporary times, because then you get to tell a story where you can heighten drama and you can focus in on character and focus in on the 3 M's, right? Wrangler is not unique in the way that it does that because it's a Western, and you have things like you have cattle rustlers, and you have, you have pickpockets, and you have, like the criminal element, right? And then you have the good guy who shows up every week in a new place to sort of right those wrongs. So it's wholly not unique in that respect. But whether it's a reflection of the time changing a little bit, getting a little more sophisticated, end of the 50s, beginning of the 60s, or Rod, a reflection on your father and his values and his interests, these things start to show up. And in fact, one of the episodes I took a note and I said, oh my God, Pitcairn is doing a Kirk speech, because, here are the moments where what may have previously ended in a gunfight and you see the bad guy, bite the dust in the middle of the town square. Instead, what you have is Pitcairn, the lead character here, making an impassioned speech about not ending the day with violence, or about honestly in I believe it's the second episode, A Time for a Hanging, kind of making this case about masculinity not being tied to violence. Like you don't grow up and become a man because you took part in a hanging of somebody who you thought had it coming, And I think that's partly a reflection on Gene, definitely a reflection on Gene, because we see that come later in Star Trek and really hit you over the head with it. But I think it's also a reflection of the time. It's like we're getting a little more thoughtful, a little more sophisticated. There are a lot of great Westerns out there, but this is different than some of the Westerns that came out, say, 10 years prior, or 15 or 20 or 30 years prior.
Yeah, having not watched many Westerns at all, and going off the assumption, perhaps incorrect, that a lot of them are a little bit more one-dimensional, good guy, bad guy, white hat, black hat. I really saw my father I saw his writing, I should say, and his character in a lot of this. When I say his character, the kind of characters he writes. And just exactly, each episode seemed to have that element, whether you want to call it Kirk, whether you want to call it the character who, in the face of this sort of era and time, is willing to speak up and stand out and say, we are more than this, We've heard that said many times in Star Trek and other writings of his. And I was pretty blown away. I really appreciated it. I think it was a Time for Hanging. I mean, there's at least 2 of them there that I was really kind of surprised about how the character spoke out against a stereotype which I would have perceived for that Western time when it was just find a bad guy and hang him, shoot first, ask questions later. And Pitcairn didn't. I mean, the fact that he cautioned against violence was I mean, I don't want to say there aren't any other writers in the world who do that. There are plenty, of course, but that is my father speaking through that character for sure. And that's what connected me with these, because at first I thought they were just going to be I don't want to say boring Westerns, but I mean, just I didn't know that would come through as clear as it did, and my brain perked up a bit. See, when we talk about video versus film and stuff like that, I don't want to say I don't care. It's just not the first thing on the list for me. Whether it's this, whether it's Star Trek, whether it's something else, I really want story first, character second. A real solid story, and then the characters to make sense. And these, the stories are there, maybe a little. I'm going to use the word simple, but maybe some controversial topics in there a little bit. But the characters, Pitcairn does a great job, I think, being that the one who points the situation out, sheds different light on the situation they're in that maybe the audience didn't really consider. And we see that all throughout, of course, Star Trek when it's doing its best. And I really loved it. I really appreciated seeing that.
And I will say this, I mean, that's me and Rod talking about this series at its best. And we're only talking about 6 or 7 episodes, because there are episodes that are definitely not at their best. And they, Ashley, kind of back to your point, they really are a product of their time and not Gene really stretching his abilities or stretching his creativity to do something novel and maybe inspiring or surprising to the audience. So here in this very short run of a series, you definitely have the highs and the lows. I think the highs are these times where it's firing on all cylinders. The production quality is great, the acting is great, the locations look great, and then the worst of it is you move inside.
It's there too.
Yeah, you're on a set. It looks very cardboard, very kind of chintzy, and then the subject matter takes a turn and it becomes this very like by numbers story. Pitcairn runs into the woman who is
damsel in distress.
Damsel in distress, and is kind of fiery and challenges him a little bit, but she's kind of put in her place, and that stuff is really uncomfortable and really weird. And I don't know if this show had it been renewed the next summer or gone on to a full season or something like that. Hopefully those episodes would have been fewer and farther between, but those exist too, and that's too bad.
Not to contradict you at all.
Please.
You know the first one that we saw, which had to do with the woman. I think she was. Well, I mean, you made the note, but we both noticed the sexual assault portion of these episodes. It just seems like almost every episode has a woman not just in distress, but usually almost being attacked by a man who wants more than just something. But watching it a second time, which I did watch the first one, which has to do with a woman who was going to get married, and then Pitcairn kind of came in, and she not to spoiler alert, she kind of lies to her father and says they met and fell in love and are going to get married to make the other guy jealous.
Yeah.
Watching that a second time, and so Pitcairn, I think he takes this role of being the man who is going to teach this woman a lesson, and she's going to learn her lesson. And not through necessarily physical abuse, but I believe he does maybe lock her in a closet at one point.
Yeah.
Watching it a second time, I appreciated it more, and it made me think, so is Pitcairn just playing a role here? Or is he... Mm-hmm. It's the teaching a woman a lesson, I mean, which is sort of slightly uncomfortable to say.
Problematic, yeah.
But I think since she was playing games, he was going to play games. Anyhow, it leads to great dialogue and conversation, even today, to discuss what was going on there.
Yeah, that's in the episode of Crisis Named Waveland, the one that is sort of the extra one that we found. And I agree with you, because she's lying from the start, so she's sort of playing a role, as you put it. Pitcairn is also playing a role in order to basically unwind the problems here. To be very generous with this episode, it's a very old school sex farce. That's the kind of story that we're getting into. And it doesn't play well, and it feels enormously dated and incredibly sexist. I think to be generous, the way you're looking at it, Rod, is like, okay, they're all playing each other here. They're all involved in this game here. If you take it seriously, if you take it on the surface level, nobody comes out looking good, and our hero is certainly less heroic. I won't give away the ending because I know that you two are going to get to it in the discussion, but you can see if maybe that ending is satisfying or not. And if you want to call us and ask us how it actually played out in the scene, we can let you know that too. But I want to contrast that, though, with another episode that your father wrote, and that is The Affair with Browning's Woman. So you have total polar opposites. So on the one hand, you have this really dated sex farce that does not hold up very well at all, contrasted with this story as episode 4. Pitcairn shows up because he wanders around, goes from town to town, place to place. He shows up at this little log cabin just as a woman is being physically assaulted by the ne'er-do-well from the ranch next door, whatever. And immediately we know that that's the bad guy, of course. What happens in this short half-hour show, though, that is very much like a stage drama, is you have this really adult relationship form between Pitcairn and Browning's woman. Browning is her husband, who we think at first maybe he's dead, but then we realize later that he's actually in jail. But this thing happens that is really kind of deep and emotional, and the chemistry feels very real, and even though it's all boiled down to a half hour, and that's all boiled down from basically a day of experience for Pitcairn, it works, and it was really thoughtful. So in a way that your father wrote maybe a more believable and much more nuanced adult relationship here, totally different from the non-nuanced, less savory adult relationship going on in A Crisis Named Waveland.
Yeah, no, I appreciate what you say, and I don't disagree with you. The only issue I had with it is, because that's one of the ones I did watch again, it all happened too fast for me. For me, in my head to be believable. I mean, not to give things away, but the word love comes out and all that. But once I get past that, the way the characters handle that discussion and their feelings, and of course there's a young boy involved, it does work. But that's one that I wish was an hour long, so I could see the relationship grow. And then, of course, not to give anything away, but at the end, whatever happens, happens. So there's a little bit more of an understanding and even more sympathy. Yeah, sympathy and understanding, perhaps, for what's going on there and the whole scenario.
Yeah. Those two episodes are polar opposites. And in fact, The Affair with Browning's Woman plays a bit more like a soap opera, but that's fine, because I look at a show like this, and we always talk about kind of connections to later work and connections to Star Trek in particular. Star Trek is this bendy, flexible format where you just go, okay, it's people in space in the future doing things, going places and experiencing these dramas and hopefully, enlightening moments in their lives. Well, contrast that with Wrangler. All right, we have our lead character who goes from place to place. Literally every episode starts with a captain's log. It's not called Captain's Log, but it's a voiceover of Pitcairn saying, May 10th, 1869, Colorado. I came upon this place and blah, blah, blah. And that sets up the episode. So here's Gene trying out this format that he didn't invent, but he sure as hell put it to use. And, put it to use here, puts it to use in Star Trek, and that just becomes baked into the cake that is those shows. But he's also using the freedom of, all right, here's the format of the Western, which is just, it's a guy out there in the world going from place to place in a time before there were telephones and in a time before there were cars, and he gets to go have an experience and maybe learn something from it, but also maybe the people around him learn something from his presence there. So it's not just that it's a parallel to Star Trek, it's just a parallel to good storytelling. But you can tell that he's finding these little things that work and then saving them and going like, oh, yeah, okay, when I get my next series, we'll do that again, too. We'll start it out, we'll do the Captain's Log because, boy, that just gets us right to the action. It's everything the audience needs to know, and then zoom with the story.
Well, really, you think about it, the beginning of Genesis 2 is a Captain's Log, too. You have Alex Cord giving this giant chunk of narration explaining when and where all of it's going on.
Right.
If it works, it works.
Very efficient storytelling. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I do have to say, though, I think it was a time for hanging on when you were ranking for. That is, I think, my favorite out of the quick viewing we've done, out of the ones that we've seen. That was one where I made the comment to you, and I was just so impressed with the character making the decisions he made in the situations he was in, and then explaining why he made those decisions. Just really, really impressed. Again, I can't say it's amazing. It has the flaws that you explained earlier, but for what we have, it really stood out for me.
Something else really interesting in that episode, because I liked it too, remember that there's a scene where the lynch mob, they've already decided that Pitcairn is guilty, and they've decided they're going to hang him. And what they do is, they throw the noose around the tree branch. They've got Pitcairn on his horse, and then one of the gang goes behind the horse to slap him and make the horse run off, so then Pitcairn will drop and hang. And we're watching that and just going like, this is a really dangerous stunt that they're shooting, again, like low to no budget, somewhere out on location. Here's a noose. Here's your actor with that noose around his neck. And it's a very tense scene because he's being as quiet and as calm as he can and just muttering under his breath to tell his horse, Sam, to stay put. And you got the guy behind him slapping the horse on the butt, get up, get up. And nothing's happening, but they really effectively build the tension in that scene. And we're just thinking, like, that is an incredibly dangerous thing to do. But here they are, just like, time to make a TV show, guys. Put a noose around our lead actor's neck, put him on a horse, and hope for the best. And there's a lot of scenes like this throughout the series where you go, like, okay, that was not easy to pull off. Even the things, to your point, Earl, about special effects, there are scenes in bars where you've got a gunshot and you have to have a glass explode or something like that. And then that's in the midst of a fight where you have people punching at or near each other. But you're doing all of that essentially live on stage, not setting up every single take as a separate shot. So it's pretty impressive. I really like that episode, Time for Hanging. I think when you get to it, there's another one called Encounter at Elephant Butte that I think is very good, and that's the one that, as we saw it, was not the completed episode with sound effects and music. It's also very good, a lot of good use of location, and you have kind of the Crooked Town sheriff who just keeps pulling anybody that he can and throwing them on a chain gang and making them work. It plays out very well, but it also ends with one of these impassioned sort of Star Trek morals, meanings, messages, like, you're better than this, don't treat people like this. It works very effectively. I think those two, and then The Affair with Browning's Woman, I think are really strong. But of course, Ashley, you and Earl will make those determinations when you review the scripts in detail for your audience.
Just looking at the scripts as I have, that Time for Hanging really emerged as my early favorite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Going all the way back to talking about episodes of Mr. District Attorney and Highway Patrol with Norman, that we were fixating so much on sort of this very 50s, very fixed idea of what masculinity is.
Mm-hmm.
And that, you show no emotion because that would be a sign of weakness.
Yeah.
Also, the whole paternal relationship going on there with the father expecting the son to just, stay in line. You're going to do this the same way I did it. Because that's very strongly implied.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And the kid finally bucking that. I'm trying to be vague so I'm not giving away the whole thing, weeks before we cover it. But I read that script and I was just, wow. And I went back and read it again and I was still, wow. Yeah. So that A Time for Hanging really emerged as my early favorite out of the bunch. Some of these bear some plot similarity to episodes of Have Gun, Will Travel, but it feels like Gene may have thought, I could do this even better without the baggage of Have Gun, Will Travel.
Yeah. Have Gun is a more sophisticated show. I think it benefited from, Sam Rolfe being such a good showrunner. There's a lot that benefited Have Gun. But at the same time, I think any smart writer-producer like Gene could look at that and say, oh, but wait, if I had the freedom to do this other thing with my own character, then I can take it in this direction. At the same time, there's only so many stories to tell, right? There's only so many variations on a theme that you can do. But I think he finds the best of it. And I think what our audience is really going to enjoy is that here in this very short run, you've got very high highs and very low lows when it comes to quality, but you can really tell that Gene is being quite experimental here, and that's the most fun of it. And then finding those little nuggets where he lets the characters kind of speak out and again do the Star Trek mission log thing, which is reach out to the audience to say, no, I'm gonna preach at you a little bit about about values here. And that's, he lets his characters do that here too.
We still need it.
Yeah, still relevant. Yeah, for sure.
Still need it. Yep.
Sadly so. Let me ask a question that only the two of you can answer. I'm curious about Jason Evers as the leading man of the show. A great deal of Gene's work thus far in the Western genre has starred Richard Boone, who sweats gravitas from every pore of his being.
Yeah.
So you already have Boone as kind of this high watermark for Gene's lead character, although it's not Gene's character, but he was tied with one other writer for writing more episodes of Have Gun Will Travel than anyone else. So I will give Gene credit for shaping Paladin somewhat. Mm-hmm. He had a larger thumb on the scale than a lot of writers on that show had, I'll put it that way. And we know about the leading men in Gene's work yet to come. Where does Jason Evers as Pitcairn fit into that pantheon?
You're right about Richard Boone and the gravitas that he sweats. That is well said. Jason Evers' Pitcairn is not as, just like the show itself, not as sophisticated as Paladin, as the Richard Boone character from Have Gun. He's not as sophisticated, not as cool, maybe, but he shares a bit of the same kind of, he's not a gunfighter, so you can't say he's the gentleman gunfighter, but he has this sort of gentlemanly presence that is wrapped in this, frankly, very masculine package. Like, I think it's Encounter at Elephant Butte. Pretty much 2/3 of the episode, he's got his shirt off, and, guy looks great. Yeah, he's not just sweating gravitas. He's literally sweating throughout the episode because he's on a chain gang busting rocks. But he has the qualities of a 1960s TV star. Tall, nice looking, well built. He's got a kind of friendly masculine presence that I think works well, contrasting where he's got to be the tough guy versus where he needs to be the much more sensitive character that he gets to be. I don't think we see as much sensitivity from Paladin. Sometimes we do, but I feel like with Paladin, there's always that sense of like, yeah, but he's still a gunfighter. he's still the best of the best there. So it's similar cloth, but not the same cloth. I don't know, Rod. What impressions did you have of Jason Evers?
The minute you said sensitivity, because I was trying to put my finger on it too, and I don't know the characters as well as you do, but there is something more humble, a little bit softer, less assertive with his character. He's when he gives his monologue, he's not preaching it. He's saying sort of, this is what I'm thinking. This is my belief. Even when he gives his, I was going to call it mission log.
Right.
It's just sort of more casual and in the day of a man's life, and this is sort of where I am, and this is sort of how I feel, and this is the situation I am in, and my feeling is we do it this way, and it's not the fist out. I'm preaching my mission because I have a mission to do. He's just a man on a journey trying to make his way, and I think he pretty much nails that tone.
Yeah.
He really does, without necessarily being seen as weak, depending on how you, I hate the word weak, but how you define the word weak. There is a strength to him, but it's not your traditional hero strength. It's almost this subdued, a leader from behind. If you listen, I'll teach you, but if not, no problem, sort of thing. So you said it best, John, but I really like that kind of leader more than I do than the one who has to step out in front and tell everyone, "Hey, everyone, I'm the leader. I have the answers." Because that's, usually wrought with ego and other things.
I think if you had Kirk on one extreme as the, heightened drama, he's the guy like ready to run into battle if need be. And then at the other end, you got Paladin, who has this like steely little, like undercurrent of danger in him. Paladin is this, I think you just said it best, Rod. He has this kind of gentleness that doesn't call attention to himself.
Not Paladin.
No, Pitcairn has this sort of gentleness. Yeah. Where he doesn't call attention to himself, but he's there to kind of dispense advice. He's there to lead. He can do it, but he's not. He doesn't have a neon sign over him.
This is fascinating, and I really wish they could track down that pilot episode.
Yeah.
Because that script in particular, and maybe this is just what Gene had to put on someone's desk to sell the show.
Right.
And get it rolling.
Right.
It's sort of, this might have been, the Where No Man Has Gone Before of Wrangler.
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, that could be it. Yeah.
The pilot, the episode at Bar M, it's chronicled both as incident and episode at Bar M, but the script says episode.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. It is an episode. I mean, I'll give him that.
Right.
That first script makes Pitcairn look like he is the greatest at everything, and he's just super cool about it. And so now I'm trying to balance that with how you're saying Jason Evers played the part.
Yeah.
I would love to see any of these, but I would really love for them to find that pilot, because that's almost the one I have the most questions about.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I mean, you've said it before, Rod. We'll throw this back out to the audience and say, if anybody's got a lead on anything, we'd love to hear from you, because this is truly kind of the missing piece of Gene's history as a TV writer. And it's so significant that it is a series that he created. He wrote the majority of these episodes. I think out of the 7, well, actually 8, we figure that he wrote 5 of those. So there might be a discrepancy, because there's one that has a title card for a different writer that is not a usual alias for Gene, but on the script itself, it's got Gene's name. So maybe it went through a couple of hands, or maybe he just came up with a wholly unique pseudonym for that one. But anybody who can help fill in the gaps there, we would love to hear.
And we'll talk to UCLA to see if there's any sort of remote thing that we can do to somehow make it accessible for at least our team, so they can have the script and see what made it to film tape.
Yeah.
And the contrast between the two. I have not read the scripts. That will be fascinating to hear you guys talk about for sure.
Your research turned up something that was really sorely needed, which is some source other than just the byline on Gene's Wrangler pilot script confirming that he was the creator of this show. Now, this was mentioned in an article that you found in the July 17th, 1960 Los Angeles Times, where Gene was profiled by Don Page in a piece giving most of it is about Gene's thoughts on censorship issues facing TV writers. And it's not even in the main part of the article. It is on the continued on page 19 part of the article.
Yeah.
And it says, and I quote, "He established the basic characteristics of Paladin and Have Gone Will Travel through a number of early episodes. He created and scripted the first 5 Wrangler tales, which are due shortly on NBC." This is practically the only corroborating evidence we have other than the script from Gene's archives.
Yeah.
In the book Star Trek Creator by David Alexander, it is mentioned that Gene produced a short-lived show called Wrangler. It says nothing about him creating it, and there's a footnote in there saying that very little information on Wrangler was available. And the process of writing that book started with extensive interviews with Gene. I mean, the man who could have set the record straight was right there.
Yeah.
Did Gene himself help this show into obscurity after the fact?
I've thought about that too, actually.
Yeah.
I'd be fascinated to hear your thoughts because the entire internet, IMDb, Wikipedia, everything, Gene's own biography, his official biography, everything says The Lieutenant was his first show. And this brings to mind a phrase that I think we have all heard, which is success has many fathers, but failure is an orphan. Did he perceive this as a failure and treat it accordingly?
It's a great question.
I can't help but speculate. I mean, well, Rod, you met David Alexander, and you know that he was around interviewing your father, and there was certainly no shortage of access that he had. That's the only thing that I can think of. Now, when David was writing that book, that was pre-internet, so you couldn't just knock out a quick search and go, oh, let me find out something else about Wrangler. Certainly a lot harder to dig through the LA Times archives than it was for me. But even that took, a considerable amount of time. With the show having disappeared the way that it did, I feel like Gene could have taken the other tactic and said, yeah, I created this other show. It was great. Too bad you can't see it, But it is significant in that, okay, look, even if they knew it was just going to be this short run, it's a summer replacement series, it's just there to fill time until Tennessee Ernie Ford comes back. That's fine. But just the fact that it was his first sale as a series, it was the first Western shot on location on videotape, and admittedly, there's at least a couple of really good scripts in there. Why not? But I think it's a little disingenuous to just have that footnote, like very little is known. Well, certainly now we know a bit more.
Yeah, no, I honestly have no idea why. It feels to me, I mean, it must be obvious that this was a conscious decision, right?
Yeah.
It was something he did, he was involved in, and he could have everywhere, or at least... Granted, the internet wasn't around, but any opportunity he had brought it to light as the first show he created. He could have even said it's the first show I created. We did some good things, some bad things, but the one I really appreciate, or the one I would really like to consider my first, is the Lieutenant. Whatever.
Yeah.
There could have been something to that effect. I don't think he was necessarily, there's nothing in this from what I've seen that is so terrible that you'd want to hide it. Unless you're in that time period, 60s, 70s, and trying to get your next show done, maybe it's better to stand on the Lieutenant than it is that. But I don't know. I really don't know.
Yeah. I think it was creatively rewriting his history a little bit. And, which is strange because he also made a lot of shows, as you both know, for Ziv that were not the greatest. So at the very least with this show, he's using familiar ideas from Westerns, but he's still putting his stamp on it. So I don't think he should have hidden it quite so intently as he probably did.
To kind of take things out on a lighter note, I do want to bring up another quote from that same LA Times article that made me laugh out loud. Gene is quoted as saying, "Television's main function is to relieve the viewer. The viewers are not paying $4.40 for a theater ticket to watch something which carries a great, powerful message. The majority want relaxation, something light. This is what TV does well." Who are you, sir, and what have you done with the real Gene Roddenberry?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He must have had the best poker face in the entire Writers Guild to say that with a straight face.
Yeah. Yeah. I do not know why he said that. That is so strange, and that jumped out at me as well. Because that's the theme of the whole article. Is just like, we're just here to entertain. There's nothing serious about it. Unless this is just his way of, I guess, publicly announcing, like, hey, I'm a writer who's here to play nice with whatever network wants to hire me. Secretly, secretly, I am slipping in the morals, meanings, messages that I want to. Maybe that was it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting quote. That really is. The mysteries are still there.
Yeah, because it's only a couple of years later that he's doing The Lieutenant, and The Lieutenant is full of these socially relevant, I mean, not to say that the other shows weren't, but that's a really landmark series that is full of the morals, meanings, messages that he wanted to grapple with on TV. So, and very much under his name. I guess a couple of years difference really drove that home.
No, I had that exact same thought, John, that he's making sure he's still hireable.
Right.
Yes, that's it.
Right.
Which I totally understand that from the perspective of 1960, and hopefully we're going to get into this later. Yeah. But we have just gotten out of a writer's strike in 1960 at the time that Wrangler has aired.
Yeah.
And one of the issues on the table was, for the first time ever, residuals. And so while there have been many a times that we've kind of ticked off a box on Genealogy and reviewed an episode of something like The Detectives, and we're just kind of like, well, that was a paycheck show. Yeah, it was a paycheck show by someone who was only going to get paid for it once and had a family to feed.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, he may well have loaded himself down with what were potentially paycheck gigs because he had to.
Yeah. Right.
So while it might seem like it's a criticism of he's not really trying. Well, he's really trying to do something. What he's really trying to do is not starve. And I have a great deal of respect for that.
Of course.
Right. Voice actor Rob Paulson has been, when he's asked in interviews, what's your favorite role, Rob? And he's like, the next one.
Right.
Because that means I get to keep working. You know, I had the thought, too, like, is this Gene like, yeah, just lighter stuff, and here's this big nuanced episode about the death penalty, or here's this episode about racism or whatever, not just with like Wrangler, but other his later work too. Like, I have to wonder, is some of that like, yeah, we're gonna lure you in because this seems like a Western where you get to chill out for a half hour and just go back to the Old West, or go off into space or whatever. Is that Gene luring people in so maybe folks get a glimpse at the bigger picture and see how that changes things?
I mean,
is this a sneaking past watchful dragons? Yeah. I think is a quote that C.S. Lewis used, like sneaking past watchful dragons. Is this what we're doing here?
I think that's
quite
just
possibly
because from the earliest shows that he was putting messages in, it always seemed subversive.
Right. Right.
And so part of me feels like while he was sitting for this interview with the LA Times, he was probably trying so hard to keep a straight face while he said that.
I think you're right. I mean, look, I'm not a TV writer by any stretch of the imagination. I can barely write fiction, so I don't do that. But I have to imagine, like, look, any good writer, they want to start with, as you were saying before, right? Start with the story, start with the characters. That's really what it comes down to. But then when you have the opportunity to drop in the, heavy ideas, you take that if you got something to say. And, well, your father was very good at doing that over a number of decades. And but probably knew where to fight his battles, too.
Well, yeah. I mean, that early on, the only thing I can think is, we all change as people. And I think my father, when he his early days, he probably felt a little bit more of the, dare I say, Paladin, Pitcairn, Kirk in him, a little bit more willing to, if necessary, do the brawl, depending on what kind of brawl, physical, verbal, whatever was necessary. But of course, in his Next Generation days, diplomacy. I mean, you could clearly see him as a person. Clearly, we all evolve and change as people. And when we're younger, and earlier in our careers of whatever that career is, we I don't want to necessarily call them mistakes, but we are less weathered and less informed and just make more, I don't want to say brash decisions, but still figuring things out, I'll say. Mm-hmm. And so for the most part, I think the closest things that I can come up with are essentially what you guys have already said. Perhaps he knew which mic was on and how to present himself to the public and potential other opportunities. And perhaps also at the same time wasn't so sure of himself, maybe in some ways. Certainly sure of himself and to be a good enough writer to have his own show and create characters with some substance to them. But still, I mean, it was the early part of his career. Yeah. All of that, I'm sure, plays in.
If there are folks listening at home that are near LA, near UCLA, can they go watch? Is it fairly accessible for them to go watch these episodes of Wrangler at UCLA?
That's a good question. I think what they need to do is contact the Film and TV Archive at UCLA Library, the Powell Library, and they are the ones who kind of make you fill out a little bit of paperwork and then can invite you in if everything works out. So I can't really speak for them, but that's what we did, is we had to go through the film, FTVA at UCLA. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right, well, I want to thank you, John and Eugene Roddenberry. It is a privilege to have you both here. Thanks for scouting this one out for us, because like I said, I'm in the middle of the country. Ashley's over on the other coast. We have no way of getting in to see this stuff. So you guys are our eyes and ears as far as Wrangler is concerned, and, you know, we may yet bug you with more questions about this as we get to individual episodes.
Good. It was my absolute pleasure to kind of follow the intrigue here of helping to solve a mystery, or at least make the portrait a little more full.
Yeah, John, and thank you and Ollie and whoever else was involved in finding this and tracking it down like you did. I wouldn't have known necessarily the first thing to do, and I'm glad you got a hold of UCLA, and thank you to UCLA for letting us actually come see what they've got. My only hope now is to anyone who's interested, somehow one day getting them the opportunity to see this, and of course listen to their points of view, and that's what we have this show for. And Earl, Ashley, everyone involved in genealogy. I remember there not so long ago the idea of this. Earl, this was a passion of yours, had many forms early on, but I'm glad we came to this form, and I'm glad that you're on it, and I'm glad your passion to really dissect and get into and ask the questions as to what did the show mean? What was the era like? Who was the man who was involved, created, wrote parts of it, and really explore. And this is just a benefit for me, honestly, because I get to have people around me look into my father and share sides of him that I never knew, pieces of his history that I didn't know anything about. So I thank you guys for that, and everyone out there listening. I appreciate your interest in whether you watch the show just for entertainment or because you find Gene Roddenberry interesting. I appreciate you guys doing it, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts one day when I run into you. So appreciate it, guys, everyone.
Genealogy is meant to be entertaining and informative, but it's also just the beginning of an ongoing conversation about the works of Gene Roddenberry. Drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com and join us on Facebook at MissionLogPod. And please remember, your comments could be used on future installments of Genealogy. Patreon is your gateway to all things Mission Log, including exclusive access to the unedited version of our show and our private Discord, where you can interact with us, your hosts, during scheduled live chats, along with occasional screenings. You can access all of this for just $1 a month. So head over to patreon.com/missionlog to see what tier works for you and join the conversation. By the way, reviews help our shows more than you know. If you don't have it in you to write a blurb about why Earl and I are the best, even just giving us 5 stars really helps go a long way to tell the algorithm that you like us and that you really like us and that other people might like us too. So please give us that 5-star rating right now before we jump on into it, or ask your voice assistant to remind you to do that when you get home. Now, folks, if you have any material that might be of interest to us that isn't already in the Roddenberry archive, please drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com. Our website is missionlogpodcast.com. And Mission Log Genealogy is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment.
On the next Genealogy, episode at the Bar M. Special thanks to consulting producers Matt Esposito, Homer Frizzell, Rand Hurl, Tom Kozak, Julie Miller, Mike Richards, Mike Schabel, Paul Shadwell, and David Takechi.
We'll be back next week with more of your favorite programs. This concludes our broadcast day.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.